We'll now look at the background to the book of Ephesians by Paul. Ephesians and Colossians and Philemon and Philippians are oftentimes referred to as the prison epistles. It looks as if Paul is writing this letter as he is a prisoner, or maybe more accurately under house arrest. He is in chains, but we do not know where he is a prisoner. Some have suggested that he is a prisoner in Caesarea, because the book of Acts tells us about Paul's imprisonment there. We know later he's under house arrest in Rome, so that's another possibility. The only other place that Paul really was imprisoned was in Philippi, but that doesn't seem to be the occasion for these letters, since that imprisonment was before any establishment of a church in Philippi, and before any of the other kinds of activities that are presupposed in these letters. So we're kind of left to wonder where Paul is. That's probably also why these letters, especially Ephesians and Colossians, more so than Philippians, but why these letters are sometimes thought to be examples of pseudonymity. In other words, that someone who is in line generally with Paul's thinking may have written this letter either as a way of honoring Paul, or it may be someone who wants to peddle ideas and thoughts under the name of Paul. But Ephesians and Colossians in particular are one of the most contested letters of authenticity. If Paul is in Caesarea, then the letter was written in the late 50s. If he is in Rome, then it was written in the early 60s. According to church tradition, Paul is executed under the Emperor Nero, and so that happens in the middle 60s. So any letter that would have actually come from the hand of Paul would have had to have been written before then. If it was a disciple of Paul, or someone who wanting to use Paul's names, then it could certainly have occurred anytime after the 60s. Many scholars, as I said, doubt that Paul is responsible for Ephesians, since the letter does not emphasize some of the key Pauline thoughts, particularly those about salvation through Christ that are found in Romans, 1 Corinthians, and Galatians. So we don't have this language of justified by faith. That kind of emphasis that we see in Galatians and Romans is not present in Ephesians. And Ephesians seems to take on other kinds of issues, thoughts, concerns, problems that, again, do not appear to be Paul's concerns in 1 Corinthians, in Galatians, or in Romans. However, many scholars do believe that Paul is the author, and that the changes in Paul's emphasis now on being raised with Christ and sitting in heavenly places, all this reflects the new situations that are confronting the Ephesians. So there is much debate about the authorship of Ephesians, and right now we're going to treat them as if they are from Paul, and primarily look at the issues of the story about Jesus that is told in them. The only other thing that we might want to add about the background for this letter is that it seems to have been delivered by one of Paul's entourage, a member of Paul's group that traveled with him by the name of Tychicus, and so he seems to be the one who actually delivered. Ephesus obviously was an important city in which Paul ministered. According to the book of Acts, he may have ministered there about 2+ years. Acts tells us that Paul ministered there, and particularly he at one time even taught in the Hall of Tyrannus, which would have been quite a major accomplishment to have had that kind of venue in order to teach. So maybe indicating a wide receptivity in Ephesus. And so now, since the church has been established, Paul wants to again exert his influence as an apostle, and on a particular issue of trying to avoid a kind of syncretism between Ephesians' interest in the spiritual world, in what Paul refers to as principalities, powers, authorities, rulers. These are spiritual beings, and their understanding of who Christ is and the salvation that they have in Christ against these particular powers. The book of Acts does tell us that the Ephesians were interested in magic, and magic is very oftentimes the interest in trying to have power over these spirits that were thought to exist, and by knowing the right incantations, by knowing the right spells, by knowing the right rituals, one can bring these powers under their own power and use them for their own benefit. And so Ephesians looks like it is now concerned with issues of both kind of the church unity as well as dealing with a distortion of who Jesus might be. So we'll now look next at the story about Jesus that is being told in this letter.